Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this second session of the Air Center Networking Friday. Very warm welcome to everyone in these strange and unusual times, and I hope everyone is staying sane and safe during lockdown. My name is Stewart Bernard. I am a research group leader of Earth Observation Group at the CSIR in Cape Town in South Africa. I'm also the Chief Scientific Officer for the Air Center. Hopefully you won't hear too much from me. I'm just here as the moderator and to introduce. And today we have some very interesting ideas from Namibia, from Dr. Samuel Mafwila, who's the director of one of the University of Namibia's research institutes. But before I introduce Sam, we will have a brief 5 minutes about some new opportunities in the aquaculture and fisheries sector. And so let me introduce Jacques Fouch, who is here representing Siggy Gruber, of the European Commission's Marine Unit on DG Research and Innovation. Jacques is the former deputy head of the unit. And we just wanted to give you 5 minutes from Jacques so he can tell us about some new opportunities that enabled by the Commission. And after that, I will introduce Sam and we'll go ahead with the main feature on the bill. So over to you, please, Jacques.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I would like first to thank the organizer of these courses, which is a very exciting exercise. So I would like just to briefly present a large initiative which has been taken by the European Commission to reinforce the cooperation on the ocean research around the Atlantic, the so-called All-Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. We start in 2013 with an agreement with the US and Canada, with the Galway Statement. Then afterward, we had also with the South Atlantic countries, mainly Brazil and South Africa for the moment, a new statement called the Belém Statement, where other members of the South are also associated. So what is it about? This large initiative mainly cover the idea of increasing the cooperation on the ocean all over the Atlantic, on the north, on the south, on the west, on the east part. And we had a very large conference forum 2 months ago, where 1,000 people attended, including somebody from Angola, where all the people reaffirmed the interest for the cooperation. So what are the area of interest of this big alliance? Mainly there are 4 big domains: deep sea research on the Atlantic, which is still very important; ecosystem functioning in relation to climate change, and this is also crucial to understand what is going on; literacy, which is science and society; and finally living resources, aquaculture and fishery. And what are we doing? So what we are doing is try to promote exchange of best practices between the different scientific community. We also try to encourage the infrastructure sharing, like the vessel time, also to create and to develop joint projects, like the large EU project, including agriculture. We are also promoting training and education. And finally, we have launched recently an initiative to involve the young generation of scientists, because we consider that the young are also our future. And we have proposed to have a young ambassador for each of the country to associate themselves. And we are very happy that there is one young scientist from the University of Angola, which is Veronica Capula, which is ambassador. So I don't know if she's, I understood she's here, so welcome, congratulations. So quickly on aquaculture, what are we doing? basically we have quite a lot of initiative, but I would like just to refer to 3 large EU projects which are really launched recently to promote the research on the South Atlantic. The first one is Aquavite. It's a very big project with 7 million euro, which tackled the low trophic aquaculture, mainly echinoderm, abalone, algae, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, and fish. Another one is Encore. It's mainly focusing on integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. And finally, we have a platform, it's a network, it's a support action. The name is Encore, which is promoting, it's not promoting research as such, but facilitating the exchange between stakeholders. So they have several stakeholder platforms on technology transfer, on infrastructure, on data sharing, training, and literacy. And so all this package of research, they are very open to newcomers. So when we come to Angola, for the moment, they are not fully involved in this project, but we will do our best to make sure that they are well informed what the project are doing and that they could also participate in the different platforms. So I know that there is already some contact with the Encore project, and we will, in the Commission, facilitate all this action. So I will finish by saying that we are now living a very difficult period, all of us, with this COVID-19. We hope that has changed a lot all our relationship, but we hope that it will finish soon, that we can continue to work together. So I will stop there for the moment, and at the end, if there are some questions, I will come to answer. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Jacques. And you will see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A tab, and I see Yesem has already used that to ask about a website. So please post your questions there for Jacques. Jacques will put up an email address, I think, for people to use.
Yeah.
And please also use that same Q&A tab for questions for Sam. Okay. All right. Thanks very much again, Jacques, and thanks to Sam for his patience. So I'll now move on to the main course, as it were. And let me present Dr. Samuel Mafwila, who is the director of the Sam Nujoma Marine and Coastal Resources Research Center of the University of Namibia. It's located at Henties Bay in a very beautiful part of the coastline there. So Sam has a PhD and master's from the University of Cape Town. So Sam and I share that particular background. And he has a great deal of experience in both public and private sector, working in the fisheries and aquaculture and agriculture domains over 20 years. And Sam is primarily going to be talking about the sustainable development of fisheries and aquaculture in Southern Africa, and I think also touching a bit on the use of indigenous knowledge systems, which is something obviously the Air Center is extremely interested in. So I think that's enough from me. We'll have about 40 minutes from Sam, and then we'll deal with questions. So hopefully so please use the Q&A tab to announce questions. And otherwise, Dr. Samuel Mafwila, Sam, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stewart. Just gonna share my screen first. Is that fine now?
Ah, brilliant.
All right. Thank you very much for introducing me. That's very humbling. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this webinar. My topic for today, we're going to look at the sustainable aquaculture and fisheries development in Southern Africa, a Namibian case, I call it. this was a very big topic. When I looked at it, it's quite broad and all that. So my perspective is that I had to take it from the regional level and then break it down to narrow it to Namibian perspective. So that's the outline of the presentation, the introduction, Southern African perspective, aquaculture. We're going to go through all this. So without further ado, I'd like to start off by saying that defining a few of these terms that we are dealing with sustainability. What is sustainable fisheries management? Sustainability means ensuring the habitat and ecosystem supporting the fishery are in good condition. A sustainable fishery has sufficient spawning stock to produce for the next generation while allowing fishing to take place. Again, when we look at the fishery itself, we can say that a fishery is socially sustainable if the fishery ecosystem maintains the ability to deliver products the society can depend on. And also, major species shift within the ecosystem could be acceptable as long as the flow of such products is maintained. And obviously, we can't talk about sustainability alone, but we're talking about sustainable development also, which actually now gives us the broader perspective in terms of the sustainability aspect of things. That's when we have, we're doing the, actually from the aquaculture perspective, that's the culturing now of organism for commercial purposes by means that have good, yes, sustainable aquaculture is the cultivation of aquatic organisms for commercial purposes by means that have good nature impact on the environment and contribute to social community development and generate economic benefits. So sustainable development is a way for people to use resources without the resources running out. And simply put, we're saying that development with sustainability that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. So if you look at this, the figure here, it shows that we have to strike a balance between the social, economic, as well as maintaining the environment in good shape in order to eke out, actually to have equitable and sustainable utilization of the resources that are coming from the environment, supporting society as well as the economic activity. So it's a very tough one actually to balance these aspects. But that's what we are geared towards too. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, we have 17 goals and 169 targets that we should meet by 2030. And one of them is that we have to cap poverty. We have no poverty, that's Sustainable Development 1, and no hunger, number 2, and the list goes on. And the most probable one that we're dealing with more in terms of fisheries and aquaculture is life below water. And that's quite key to our deliberations today. If you look at it, we have the biosphere as the basis for supporting society as well as the economy of countries. So Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action is quite key also, and Sustainable Development Goal 14, life underwater, as well as 15, life on land. This constitutes the biosphere as a foundation to support human life. So that's quite key for our deliberations today. So if you look at it, it forms a triad between society, science, and government, whereby the central point now brings us to the issue of the blue economy and ocean economy. We have society where economy and social ecosystems are actually affected, and we have research that informs, or the science that informs decision-making, which is government, and government makes the rules and implementation as well as adjudication of these rules. So if we have to strike a balance, then we may be leading towards the sustainable blue ocean or blue economy. And if I have to come down to the Southern African perspective, we have a regional body called the Southern African Development Community, which is abbreviated SADC. It's currently composed of 15 member states. The SADC vision is one of a common future, a future in a regional community that will ensure economic well-being, improvement of standards of living and quality of life, freedom and social justice, peace and security for the people of SADC. If you look at the map on the side here, you can see all the 15 members of SADC. This is the regional body with such a very strong vision. Among these, to support this vision, actually SADC has a policy framework which supports all the member states. And first of all, I picked out what is relevant to aspects of fisheries and aquaculture. The first one is the code of conduct for responsible fisheries. You need to have a policy framework in place in order to create an enabling environment for operation of fisheries as well as aquaculture. So that came into effect in 1995, and we have the SADC protocol on fisheries of 2001. And there is a Dar es Salaam Declaration of 2004. And there are ACP strategic plan of action for fisheries and aquaculture, 2012 to 2016, and its implementation roadmap to 2020, which is this year. And also, a part of the legal toolbox is that we have the regional agricultural policy as well, which speaks to aquaculture as well, and policy framework and reform strategy for fisheries and aquaculture in Africa of 2014. Agenda for Sustainable Development, that is 2015-2030, and we have the SADC Regional Aquaculture Strategy and Action Plan, 2016, as well as the SADC Regional Aquatic Animal Health Strategy, 2016-20, up to 2026. So what is this policy framework, so-called the protocol on fisheries? This actually paves the way for better management of the regional resources in terms of fisheries and aquaculture as well included. And it speaks to living resources and aquatic ecosystems within the jurisdiction of state parties, living aquatic resources of state parties, ranges which extend outside the areas under their jurisdiction, high seas resources, as may be considered to be of interest of the state, fishing by nationals of state parties and activities directly related to, as well as international activities outside SADC that promotes objective of this protocol. So this actually lays a very good foundation on a regional level. And in their article 3, there's objectives to promote and enhance food security and human health. Food security is quite key. When we look at the 17 goals that we're dealing with, we are in a race to actually achieve those goals by 2030, and we have only less than 10 years left in order to meet those goals. So again, SADC encapsulates this objective within the protocol on fisheries. That fisheries is a key activity in the region that can enhance food security and human health, as well as safeguard the livelihood of fishing communities, sustainability. There are some fishing communities along the coasts of Southern Africa, as well as the rivers and lakes within SADC that are dependent on fish, and actually to maintain their sustainability. So these resources have to be managed in a very good manner. And as well as the generation of economic opportunities for nationals of the region and ensure future generation benefit from this. So that also brings out the aspects of sustainability in the fishing industry within SADC. So if you look at if we have to look at the aquaculture, we have the global aquaculture production. This is unfortunately 4 years old, but it's 2015. If you look at the African aquaculture contribution in context, about 2.33%. If you look at the world aquaculture production, that's on a global scale. You look at Asia, you look at Americas, you look at Europe, you look at Africa's contribution is quite is quite minimal. So that shows that we still have room actually to sustainably introduce aquaculture within the region. African aquaculture production, this is now African aquaculture in the regional context, SADC region. This is the African production compared to, we have Egypt here, a single country, Nigeria, as well as SADC. So still, SADC contributed about 60,851 tons of fish from aquaculture. And then the perspective again continues with SADC contributions, which contributes about 0.08% to the world aquaculture output minus seaweed. This is individual country contribution to SADC aquaculture output of 69,000 tons in 2015. You can see the spread there. The leader in the region being Zambia in 2015, Zimbabwe, Madagascar leading the top 4 in South Africa, and all the other countries. And if you look at Namibia, we're still producing very little in terms of the contribution to the regional production. And then you have the top 4 countries, which equates to about 77% of the production and accounting for 75% of the value. You look at the y-axis. On this axis, you have the volume in tons, and on the right axis, you have the value. Again, we have the leading countries here, Zambia. If you look at the curve there, Zimbabwe, and you have Madagascar appearing there also. So the top 4 countries contribute about 77% of the production, accounting for 75% of the value. So there's still more room. And look at the per capita consumption of fish. This figure is for SADC as well. You can see how Seychelles, they really are contributing a lot to the per capita consumption of fish compared, if you compare it to any other country in SADC. And Namibia, yes, we are there in the curve, but we're producing perhaps from the capture fisheries, but we don't eat much of the fish. So, and then on the regional perspective, we're talking of the BENGUELA Current Convention, which is another regional body, even though it's a three-country agreement which forms the commission. The BENGUELA Current Commission is the multi-sectoral and intergovernmental initiative of Angola, Namibia, and South Africa, and it promotes the sustainable management and protection of the BENGUELA Current Large Marine Ecosystem, the BCLME. Among other activities, it supports, among others, the sustainable and responsible fisheries as well as aquaculture. So this regional body has also sparked the interest in terms of the monitoring of the environment as well as the fishery stocks. Not only do they deal with that, but they also deal with other activities, including shipping, including pollution, including transportation, or other activities. So this is the geographic boundary of the BCC. They are 3 countries, Angola, Namibia, and South Africa. They are operating within this economic exclusive zones. And of course, the adoption of the ecosystem approach to fisheries, BCC was very fundamental in terms of implementation of these approaches in helping the 3 countries to implement the ecosystem approach to fisheries, because we're talking about responsible fisheries as well as aquaculture. And if we turn back now to the classical case of Namibia, Namibia, on the other hand, is the driest country in sub-Saharan Africa. 3/4 of the country in the south, central, west region is categorized as arid to semi-arid. And we only have perennial rivers, which forms borders with our neighbors, Angola and South Africa in the south. So that presents a little bit of a problem for aquaculture because fresh water is quite scarce since Namibia is quite dry, and those water bodies that are there are actually shared water bodies between us and the borders, our neighbors. And apart from that, there are some inland water bodies, freshwater bodies, which are in lakes as well as dams, man-made dams and so on, which holds a promise actually for the development of aquaculture, inland aquaculture. So Namibia's freshwater resources are mainly derived from groundwater and dams, some 28 major and minor dams, and further 5,000 farm dams. A lot of farmlands have their own dams. So the marine environment entails the entire western side of bordering the Atlantic Ocean. And the country has 4 coastal towns, that is Lodwes in the south, Walvis Bay, and Swakopmund in the central region, as well as Henties Bay, with only 2 harbors at Lodwes and Walvis Bay. And several conditions in Namibia are favorable for the development of aquaculture. We have the vast unpopulated coastline. We have abundant natural resources such as large pool of potential aquaculture species, unpolluted marine and freshwater water bodies, human resources trained in fisheries and aquatic sciences, as well as the political will that is there. And to have a very successful, sustainable fishery as well as aquaculture, the country needs to have a legislative framework in place. So cohesive, clear, and efficient legal regulatory kind of environment exists in Namibia. And this supported the development of aquaculture. The first document was in 2001, where aquaculture policy was tabled or launched. And we have the Aquaculture Act in place, Act number 18 of 2002, and Aquaculture Strategic Plan for 2004, Aquaculture Master Plan of 2014. So all these are documents or legislative frameworks that supports, actually creates an enabling environment as guiding tools to, towards the development of aquaculture. So the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources, fisheries and aquaculture sector, they're actually the lead ministry, government ministry that are responsible for as a competent authority for managing aquaculture within the country. It is composed of 4 directorates. We have the Directorate of Resource Management, responsible for carrying out scientific research, providing information relevant to managing the fisheries. And Directorate of Operations is charged with monitoring, control, and surveillance. And we have the Directorate of Policy, Planning, and Economic, tasked with coordinating the formulation, implementation, as well as monitoring and evaluation of fisheries policies and legislation, as well as economic research analysis. And the last one is the Directorate of Aquaculture, which is tasked to ensure responsible, sustainable development of aquaculture to achieve socio-economic benefits and environmental sustainability. So you can see that the Directorate of Aquaculture is actually tasked with socio-economic benefits as well as environmental sustainability. So the Minister of Fisheries and Marine Resources, with their directorates, as I mentioned already, that creates an institutional framework within which aquaculture is supported, as well as the fisheries. Directorate of Aquaculture, to dive a little bit in what they do, they serve as a single point for contact, one-stop shop for permitting, liaison with other departments, decision-making, developmental role, biotoxin testing laboratories, monitoring water quality at various sites along the coast. Extensive extension services are also provided. And division within the Department of Aquaculture, there's disease and quality control, based in Swakopmund, where they monitor all these biotoxins, disease surveillance, water quality monitoring, and so on. And you have the management and extension based at Kifi and Divundu for aquaculture. That's mainly for research and management and extension services. This is the map detailing aquaculture activities in Namibia. You have on the legend here, you have the aquaculture establishments where they are growing species, freshwater species, and some areas have hatcheries. As you see there, they concentrated more in the north. That's where we have most of the readily available freshwater from the rivers, from the Zambezi River there. And we have Kavango River on this side, where you have a nursery at Kamchonga, which is Kifi. We call it Kifi, Kamchonga Fisheries Institute. and a couple of farms along the river. That's the Kavango River right there. And then we have the this belt here within the Kuvale area where there's some availability of fresh water, and as well as a few administrative as well as regulatory as well as training in Windhoek, and we have some farms in the south as well as the mariculture activities along the coast, mainly concentrated in Walvis Bay, in Central Coast, Walvis Bay, Swakopmund, and a little bit of activities in Henties Bay. And we have another southern town, which is Ludres, where activities of mariculture activities are taking place. So this is the mixture of extensive and semi-extensive culture system, both in fresh and marine waters. Freshwater aquaculture is actually funded by government, and it has been a government initiative, and it's a community-based and a cooperative activity, and requires a high degree of labor and relies on extensive culture methods. Focuses on food security, income generation, as well as improvement of rural livelihoods. And freshwater aquaculture production is very low, and mariculture requires a huge startup capital and technical expertise. And private investors are involved in mariculture, and they target high-value species for their culture. Freshwater species have been cultured. We have bream, which is tilapia, or Oreochromis andersoni, and we have Oreochromis mozambicus, as well as Coptododon rendali, previously called tilapia rendali. And then we have African catfish, Clarius garipinus and Clarius gamensis. These are two species that are cultured in Namibia. And inland aquaculture is mainly pond culture. They have ponds where they are doing the grow out sites. Hatcheries are mostly in enclosed facilities and so on. And when we have to take a little bit of a dive into the inland fisheries, these are fisheries taking place in rivers and lakes in Namibia. It's mainly artisanal or subsistence, and management of these systems actually in lakes and rivers are within the traditional authorities, and there's traditional setups in the northern areas where traditional authorities have some kind of upper hand in terms of regulations, in terms of implementing them within their communities in order to make sure that the resource is sustainably harvested and taken and protected to some extent. So these are indigenous, a bit of indigenous knowledge systems within those communities. They know how much to limit the people they take out from the systems. And it's a combination of traditional authority as well as the Ministry of Fisheries as an overseeing agency, government agencies within these systems. And there are some closed systems that occurs within these systems where fishers are not allowed to fish a certain season, just to allow the broodstock to be able to spawn. And indigenous knowledge systems on fishing, there's a lot of knowledge within the communities in terms of fishing. They know what time of the day, what time of the month to go out into these rivers and lakes to catch what type of fish and so on, using the moon and darkness and so on. So they have all these measures in terms of knowing what is the best time to go fishing and all that. This is a long practice kind of indigenous knowledge system. And the catch processing, they know all types of fish. They have names, indigenous names for all the fish species, and they practice the fish preservation by drying the fish, because markets could be far and they won't have the facilities for storage in terms of freezers or deep freezers. So they do drying and salting and so on. And those few lucky ones are able to take the fish that they catch straight to the markets. And there's an issue of of culture and tradition in terms of what kind of fish you can eat and what you cannot eat. And all this forms part of the indigenous knowledge systems. Excuse me. So there's quite a rich kind of a knowledge system within these local communities. In terms of management, a traditional authority have representatives within in every community where there's a headman who adjudicates on matters relating to resource management, who should fish, who should not fish. People even coming from other areas are not just allowed to go into the lake. If the traditional headsman is there, they have to respect the rules and regulations within the particular community and so on. So there's quite a very rich and diverse kind of ways in terms of management and sustainability of the fisheries, traditional fisheries. Let's have a look at the mariculture development in Namibia. This was established, well established only in sheltered bays. We have Ludres in the south and Walvish Bay in the central area. And we have other sites that would require require pampa shore systems, and this entails high capital and operational costs. Mostly, it's only private investments that are able to do partake in such kind of maricultural activities. The Namibian mariculture industry extends back in 1984 with the production of oysters, and abalone came in 2003. An oyster part was imported from Europe and Asia, but an oyster seed stock producer started a hatchery to make sure that the local industry, they do not have to suffer in order to get a spat, they can get it locally in 2004. So most of the oysters are exported to South Africa and some are consumed locally, 10 to 20%. And newly established Asian markets provides the much needed market diversification of the Namibian oysters. So there's been now consignments headed for Asia and so on. So that's it's actually quite good for market diversification. These are the species that are cultured. We have the Pacific oysters, Ostrea edulis, European oysters, Chrysostria gigas. We have the scallops, Agropecten maximus, and abalone. This is South African abalone in the moon. Haliatis magii, there's another species that is, and all these are very high value species, and they generate a lot of income for the farmers. Research, extension, and training. The Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources, as the national agency, they are very, very up and running in terms of the research, extension, as well as training. We have the National Marine Information and Research Center, so-called NATMEC in Swakopmund. We have Freshwater Research Institutes, Hardap Inland Fisheries Institute, Kamchonga Inland Fisheries Institute. All these belongs to the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources. The University of Namibia established the Nujoma campus, where the Nujoma Marine and Coastal Resources Research Center comes in, where fisheries research is also taking place, aquaculture, shellfish, and finfish, as well as seaweed. And we have a Department of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences, where training is taking place to produce graduates that are taking up jobs within the fishing industry, as well as creating their own businesses to be employers. Just a snapshot of SANUMARC. SANUMARC in development from 2002. It was just the two buildings in the desert there. But what you can't see here is that the ocean is just straddling this desert. And this is the development thereafter of SANUMARC 2009. And we have the current, this was 2011, and this is the current. We have the ocean on the other side. That's the the whole center, which has formed a campus now. And we have facilities within the center, which is the Kito Mushingeni Mariculture building, which is a state of the art. This is mainly for finfish research, looking at the some potential finfish within the Namibian waters that can be cultured. For example, kabelio is one of the cardinate species that have been investigated for the whole tail to head kind of research. So these facilities exist to support aquaculture in Namibia, and we have shellfish sections within that house. Just to give you a little bit of what this center does as research focus within its aquaculture, biogeochemistry, fish and fisheries, algal research, mushroom research, coastal and desert agriculture, renewable energy research, water resources research, and land, ocean, atmosphere interactions, as well as community outreach. So back again to Namibia's capture fishery is predominantly marine. Few fishing activities in freshwater bodies, in rivers, lakes, and dams, and a prehistoric notation here, pre-independence. Marine fisheries resources were free for all, and distant fleets were exploiting the resource. Maximum catches were observed in the 60s and early 70s. Overexploitation of resources took place in the 1980s and the collapse of some of the stocks. At independence in 1990, government of the Republic of Namibia issued a moratorium on fishing, and this led to a development of a white paper, so-called the Fisheries Sector White Paper. This emanated into a Sea Fisheries Act of 1992, with a sole and main purpose of rebuilding the stocks that were nearly collapsed in early 1990s. Namibia claimed its exclusive economic zones, and they excluded foreign distant fishing vessels from the waters. So the key to this story is that the institutional framework had to be in place with a leading ministry as the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources, with its directorates of operation as well as resource management operations. That's where you have the technical services, as well as monitoring and control and surveillance, which is quite key to maintain your stocks and fend off illegal fishing and other illegal activities within your waters. You need to have a very strong enforcement. And in terms of resource management, applied research is conducted within this directorate at the National Information and Research Center in Swakopmund, and research management. So this fisheries sector white paper was developed with three main objectives. That's, as I mentioned, rebuilding fish stocks and controlling their exploitation, establishing effective mechanism for monitoring and surveillance of resource use and exploitation, as well as establishing favorable or flourishing fishing industry that would add value to the resource and empower Namibian public. So the legal framework is in place. That is the Marine Resources Act of 2000, Act 27 of 2000. Marine regulations, Marine Resources Regulation of 2001, Namibia's Marine Resources Policy of 2004, and Territorial Sea and Exclusive Economic Zone of Namibia Act of 1990, policy statement on granting of rights of exploitation to utilize marine resources and allocation of fishing quotas. All these policies are in place. So that is just to make sure that the Namibia's and her resources are managed sustainably. The Inland Fisheries Resources Act, #1 of 2003, which governs inland fisheries, is also in place, and we have the Aquaculture Act, as like mentioned earlier in the section dealing with aquaculture. So access to the fisheries resources, it's well monitored and controlled by the Ministry of Fisheries. We have you need to have the fishing rights in order to be able to fish within the Namibian waters, quota systems as determined by the total allowable catches, which is scientific information that comes from the research arm of the ministry, advising the ministry in terms of what is out there, what is available of a particular species, and what should be allocated to the fishing industry. And there's all sorts of controls whereby you need your fishing license, you must have the ownership of a vessel. In most cases, if you have a vessel, I think you stand a very good chance in getting all the ticks in the boxes of what is required to do fishing activities within Namibian waters. Namibianization was popularized to Namibianize the fishing industry. A lot of Namibians were encouraged to join the fishing sector and Namibianize the fishing sector. And processing of fish to be done locally, land-based. This is to make sure that local employment is created for the local people. So the marine environment of Namibia, this is the BENGUELA coral current ecosystem and the straddling desert. That's where the desert meets the ocean. It's a very variable environment. In the geographical space, that's where we are. That's the BENGUELA current large marine ecosystem right there. And this system is driven by the wind. It's an upwelling system, which makes sure that there is enough nutrients coming to the surface in the photic zone where phytoplankton are producing and supporting the top of the food chains and food webs and so on. So this is quite a productive system, and we tend to get a very prolific fish population most of the time. Other commercially targeted species includes horse mackerel within the system and sardines, and Namibia has one of the most productive fishing grounds in the world. Its territorial waters contains about 20 different species, such as pilchard, anchovy, and horse mackerel, as well as lobster, hake, and monkfish. This sector has grown to become the country's second biggest exporter or export earner after mining. Namibian fishing industry is predominantly in the industrial, and you have the demersal fishery as the most valuable industry, whereby in terms of value, hake fish, malicious capensis and paradoxus are caught within the waters of Namibia, and these have a very high value, even though in terms of volume, we have horse mackerel dominating the catches. But in terms of value, the hake fishery is the most valuable. And we have other species such as orange ruffy, monkfish, as well as some crustaceans. These are deep sea red crab, chestnut narity, as well as other bycatches that are of commercial importance. Research, monitoring, and surveillance is quite key in terms of ensuring the sustainability of the fisheries. There are scientific surveys being conducted by the ministry where they have to look at the stocks, annual stock biomass surveys, environmental surveys, and recommend a TSC. So that's the mandate of NATMEC, actually, to conduct these surveys. A lot of efforts have gone into the assessment of these stocks, which includes all our stakeholders, and in Europe, they usually come to do some kind of joint surveys sometimes, as well as other surveys for the region. So operation is actually very important to do the monitoring and surveillance. Namibia has a fleet of planes to do aerial patrols within their EEZ. These are fixed wing planes. Fisheries patrol boats, like this one here, Samuel Mafwila. These boats are patrolling the waters of Namibia just to deter illegal fishing and other illegal activities, as well as inspections. And there's a story of Namibia when it comes to monitoring and inspections and so on, we have fisheries observers on board fishing vessels. This is provided by an agency of government, so-called the Fisheries Observer Agency. They have to provide fisheries observers on board every fishing vessel. This is to make sure that fishing is taking place in the right areas, they are catching the right sized fish, they're using the proper nets and so on. So all this information is captured by observers. So in summary, there is a legal and policy framework that exists. There is an institutional framework within the region as well as at the national level. And there is political will at the regional level as well as the support is there. We just have to implement these policies and acts in order to make sure that aquaculture fisheries is managed sustainably. Environmental monitoring is quite key also in order to achieve ecological sustainability as well as economic sustainability. In the absence of monitoring, of environmental monitoring, then we may lead to depletion of some of the stocks and also having deteriorating kind of environment. So the more effort goes into the environmental monitoring and also keeping in check of the stocks within the waters of Namibia, and that will make sure that economic sustainability continues. And of course, the social dimension of things, the human aspect, is that we are eking out economic benefits to support a lot of things, the nation programs and so on. So I think I may have taken most of my time, but I'd like to thank you all. I'll stop here. I'll leave time for questions.
Excellent. I'll give you the sign language applause, Sam. Thank you very much indeed. That was fascinating. Excellent. So I think we've got maybe 10 minutes or so for questions. And I see we've got a couple of questions posted in the Q&A, so I'll start with those. If you have other questions for Sam, please post them there and we'll try and get around to them. So Sam, I don't know if you're seeing that Q&A panel, but I'll start with a question from Patience Abatola, who effectively asks, how did you rebuild your fish stocks? So if we think of your slide about, the 70s and the big fish stocks, so let's maybe take hake as the biggest commercial species. Do you want to maybe talk a bit about how that stock was rebuilt up to sustainable levels?
Yes, thank you for the question, Patience. Actually, this was a very radical step taken by government to close the fishing. They have totally closed some of the fishing industry or fishing, the catches for certain species that were deemed to be at the brink of extinction or overexploitation. They had to close those fisheries. Up to until 1995, we gained independence in 1990, and up until 1995, some of those stocks were not open for fishing. So that when the fishing started, then it was a steady increase in terms of the total allowable catch that was allocated for to be caught. So that steady increase in TSC, as well as monitoring the environment, monitoring the stocks, actually helped Namibia to rebuild some of those stocks.
Wow, okay, that is quite radical. I guess so the fact that it was an industrial fishery rather than artisanal, you can imagine with artisanal that just wouldn't really be an option, right? So,
sure, it was more of the industrial fishing, more of the marine capture fishing.
Okay, great.
Sure.
So let's look at the question from Yaya Soro saying, what strategies are you using to avoid the impact of agricultural pollutants on the mariculture spaces?
Namibia, we're quite lucky that the desert actually straddles the coastline. So very few agricultural activities are taking place within the ambits of the coastline. Catchment areas are there, yes, but then they don't do any form of crop production within those areas. It's quite arid, it's quite dry. So the use of any sort of fertilizers and all that is almost non-existent. So we wouldn't worry about the washover of these fertilizers into the ocean or polluting the nearby coastal areas.
Great, thanks, Sam. So let's look at some other questions here. So let's look at the demand and supply gap of fish to meet the Namibian demand. So this is potentially interesting, I guess, in terms of what the export versus domestic demand is across the species. Do you want to maybe have a think about that one?
Yes, Namibia has a very interesting history. We love eating red meat. That's a given. Fish is it's a second thought. So most of the fish that we catch actually is meant for export, and it was a big worry actually for government actually to see that all the fish is exported, and they established something called an agency to support the fish consumption locally in order to consume what we catch, some of it locally. And that agency has done a lot of strides in supporting fish consumption within the communities. And as of to date, I think our per capita consumption has gone up as compared to the early 90s and early 2000s.
Great, thanks, Sam. So we got time for just one or two more. So let's look at this question from Enrique, saying what type of environmental monitoring is carried out, and does it include biological variables?
Environmental monitoring, it looks at the water column aspects, your dissolved oxygen, your nutrients in the water, heavy metals and so on. So that's more environmental aspects of it. Looking at the physical aspects as well, the current patterns, the movement of water and so on. So the upwelling intensity, all that form part of the environmental monitoring.
Stewart, this is Jerry. May I interject a quick question here?
Please, go for it, Jerry.
Right, so returning to the subject of aquaculture, Sam, you indicated in one of your early slides that the SADC region has about 3.5% of global aquaculture production. That percentage struck me as being very interesting because it's very similar to what we account for here in the United States. Here, aquaculture is viewed as being still a relatively small industry, but with great potential for growth. So when we think about the blue economy, and then also aspects of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, poverty goals, societal goals, etc., aquaculture is viewed as having significant potential, but it requires a lot more development in the science and technology realm. So I'm wondering if Namibia has joint research activities with other countries, perhaps of the sort that Jacques might have alluded to in his presentation. So give us a few words about any kind of international collaboration that Namibia is involved in the aquaculture field.
Right. Thank you, Jerry. Yes, collaboration in aquaculture have been taking place. And I have to confirm from Jack's talk that indeed Namibia, I think we are partially part of the Aquavitae. I have a colleague from mine at the center of it, part of that Aquavitae project. And So there's been international collaborations from the onset. We've had a lot of, not only in collaboration, but also in financial support for establishment of or development of aquaculture in Namibia. Nations like Norway, Iceland, and so on, they have contributed immensely to the development of aquaculture in Namibia, as well as the Japanese and Vietnam. They've been here in Namibia to assist in terms of the initial stages or the initial stages of the development of aquaculture in the country. And some of this collaboration still continues, and we still get partners that are willing to actually assist and work also with Namibians to do research in aquaculture and so on, and support the local industry of aquaculture. It's quite small, but the biggest headache is freshwater availability. That's what we are struggling with. And also access to finance. Those are key factors that are determining lack of participation of local people in this industry. Otherwise, it holds a very huge potential.
Yes, that's great. I would hope that potential can be developed and realized both here in the Northern Hemisphere and in the Southern Hemisphere.
Great, thanks Jerry and Sam. So I think we're just going to have a last couple of questions because we're already running 5 minutes over time, but it's a shame to close down such an active discussion. So there's an interesting question here from Christos about the relationship between diversity and fisheries in Namibia and the data. So Sam, do you want to comment on that? I mean, you could interpret that question in a number of ways. My immediate interpretation was, is fishing reducing diversity? You know, is there a payoff relationship there?
Thank you, Christos, for the question. Of course, the scientific indication that with more overexploited fishing environment, you tend to find that there is a serious fluctuation in terms of the species richness as well as the distribution of the species. It has, I think, twofold. One is that overfishing may exert pressure on the populations of fish, leading them to have retarded growth, the reduce in size and so on because of pressure and stress. And also we're looking at the ecosystem as in a holistic way. So if you look at the marine biodiversity, it's not only about fish, it's about the whole ecosystem, looking from the benthos to the water column. So with the demersal trawling, it has some kind of effects on the seafloor and destruction of those seafloor or those bottom-living species, which are the true architectures of the sediments of the seafloor, may lead to the destruction of habitats. This could be special habitats for the special fish species, and they may see distributional shifts. And of course, there is some data that exists. There are some data that exists both on fisheries as well as marine biodiversity in Namibia.
Great, thanks, Sam. So I think let's go for maybe one last question, and I can see that this question's been repeated a couple of times, which is about cage culture, i.e. finfish mariculture in Namibia. So I'll just add to the contextualization of the question in that I know in South Africa we keep trying this, and because we have such a very dynamic coastline, it's actually quite hard to develop technology that can, you can sustain in place given the very rough nature of the seas. So, but Sam, your thoughts about cage mariculture in Namibia, and is it there? Where, is it going to be developed? What are the chances?
There's been a couple of feasibility studies to introduce cage culture in the ocean. Unfortunately, we have a very hostile environment. It's quite rough out here. We don't have sheltered bays. There are very, very few sheltered bays, and these form part of our harbors, the 2 harbors that we have. And if it were to be installed offshore, one should be mindful of the physical environment, which are the very strong current systems and so on. Well, we, like you said, we need technology that will kind of upset the physical conditions and be able to keep these cages in place. Otherwise, it will be drifting all over. On the other hand, I see, is this the same question from Sulaiman?
Yeah, it's one from Sulaiman and Ibukuno Luya, excuse my pronunciation, both asking about cage culture.
All right. Yes, so at present, there is no cage culture taking place in Namibia, especially for finfish. We have in sheltered bay, like Warvish Bay, the type of system that they are using. They're using ROPS to grow some of these mussels and as well as some of the oysters, but they are contained, but they're only attached to a rope within the bay. So it's not out there, out in the open waters offshore.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're 10 minutes past our closing time. So I would like to thank Jacques for his announcement, much appreciated. And I would like very much to thank Sam for some very interesting presentation and discussion around the questions. And thank you very much, Sam.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to my presentation. I'll keep some of these questions. I'll try as much as possible to answer them after this, after the presentation.
Great. Okay, and thank you all very much, everyone, for attending, to have such good attendance. I hope you found it interesting and look forward to seeing all of you and more next Friday.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Jose, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, so much. I mean, I don't know if you know, but we have Milton Campbell from Brazil next Friday. I hope to hear from you. Let me see if I can find. No, I can't find.
Hi, I'm here. Yes, Jose.
Okay,
good morning from here.
I was trying to contact you. So can you say something about your presentation next week?
Okay, thank you very much for that. Good morning for my Western colleagues and good afternoon for my Eastern colleagues there. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Next Friday, I'm gonna introduce a little bit about the Brazilian National Space Research Institute, some of the research and development activities we've been developing more related to the monitoring the ocean from space laboratory. And moving from shore to the ocean, we're gonna mention about some efforts we've been doing in terms of mangroves and coral reefs, mapping and studies, and then to development of remote sensing products for meta-oceanographic environmental monitoring and things like that. So hope it will be fun.
Well, I'm sure it will. So thank you so much for all the panelists. I'm really, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stewart, Sam, Jacques, Milton, Jerry, I mean, Sheila, everybody. Okay, hope to see you next week.
Okay, very good. Good day, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.